Hello again. I can see that there's actually only one more significant runaway situation that I can remember before school started, at which point I sort of stopped running away for a little bit in order to focus on school. I actually started like saving stuff up in my locker, but putting that aside, still in the summer, the last major runaway I can remember is he was getting really upset with me. We had just come home from something and he was very angry. I was getting more and more frightened, excuse me, of him and what he might do. And I was just outside the vehicle and he like bent down and went to like the back of the vehicle to get something. And I just saw an opportunity and I took it and I booked it. I ran, between the bush and the motorhome to the back of the property. I jumped over into the neighbor's property, ran that way, jumped that fence, jumped another fence, and then I was in such a hurry, of course. I jumped a fence that ended up being like a wobbly, like there was no sturdiness to it. It was just a mesh fence that was being held up, but it like easily collapsed and being pushed. So I now actually have, at the end of that night, there was blood in my crotch, and I was like, oh, did I get my period? Because it wasn't terrible. It was just, there was blood there, and I ended up finding that, no, I didn't get my period. I just ended up falling down on top of this fence, but adrenaline, I didn't really notice it at the time, and, like, having, three of the prongs stab up into me. So I have, like, dots on either side of the inside of my legs. I have no damage in the middle, like, that I've noticed, so they're, like, it didn't really damage the middle, but there's, like, a dot on either side of the inside of my legs from that happening, from falling on that fence. And then I just kind of, like, kept hopping fences, going back in people's backyards, just booking it as much as I could. And I mentioned that we lived near a park, so I ended up coming out beside around the park, and then I just kind of ran into the large brush area that they didn't really trim, and I just sat there and hid and waited. And he started pursuing me, not the way I would run, but he like got into his van and started looking for me. I believe he like immediately went around to the street around because he thought maybe I'd come out that street, but I didn't. I went over to the park. So he then ended up like actually driving his vehicle through the park and like screaming my name and just kind of being hysterical, asking me to come back. Please come back. Please come back. And I, of course, did not comply. And when he finally drove out of like range, I then ran like through the rest of the park, across the street, and down to like the riverside, and then just kind of ran along that way because there was no way that he could have seen me from the road. And man, I just know I got stung and bit by 1,000 things that night. But adrenaline is an amazing thing. Like I kind of noticed it, and at the same time, I did not care because I was just going. I was going, and my direction was Chris's mother's house. I had a place to go, and so I was like, I'm going there. And I it's crazy. It was the middle of the night. I was running like back alleyways and stuff, and again, like another total situation of like being raped by some other random stranger or being murdered, and that didn't happen. Just kept on my way until I finally got to Chris's and knocked on the door, and they let me in again. And it was interesting that time. He actually like brought me a whole bunch of my shit, and how did I end up? I don't remember how he ended up manipulating me back that time, but I think that was the time that he threatened them. He was like, if you don't leave, I'm gonna hurt them. I'm gonna fuck them up or do something to them. So I was just like, so I felt like I had to go again. Yeah. And it's funny because I can see in my testimony that I hadn't actually mentioned yet about him breaking my dog's leg, although I know I did mention that in the video already, but like, yeah, there was a time in Toronto where he basically like ended up twist breaking the dog's leg by throwing it. And so we fed the vet some crazy story, and he ended up trading a $6,000 welder to the vet because he was a farmer vet, so he like could really use that as a resource. He exchanged that for fixing the dog's leg. And yeah, as far as I know, he's a happy-go-lucky, pretty much a normal dog now, other than God knows what he's done to him since. But he was always just a very happy dog despite that happening, which was weird, but good, I guess. But right after that happened, I guess the summer kind of wrapped up and school was starting. At this point, I was part-time at university and I was returning back to high school that I already graduated from. We just convinced them to take me back because I was a good student anyways, and they had better courses than the adult school that was available. So I went back there to get some science courses to switch my degree, and started, as I mentioned, I started stocking up clothes, saving up clothes, basically, and money and toothbrush and like items in my locker. And I tried to get a hold of Chris's mom again to like ask her, you know, can you please let me try again to get away? Can you please help me? You know, after already going and leaving twice. But I couldn't get a hold of her. And my OSAP, or my student loan that gets released halfway through the year, was due in January. And so like when I was expecting it to be due is when I ran, because I thought I could use that to get a place. So that day I booked it and I didn't go home. I grabbed the bus and I went to where Chris was at the time, and he was actually living with his girlfriend up by Fanshawe, and he could tell this was happening, and he actually followed the bus and followed me and was like ranting and raving at me and yelling and making a scene, trying to get me to get off the bus and to like come with him, but I just refused and was like, no, I'm going. And then I finally got a hold of Chris's mom that night, and she told me, no, nope, you can't come live with me because my common law husband has decided that he likes the house being empty of children now, and we don't want any more people, or we don't want anyone here. So I'd run away and had nowhere to go. And at the same time, she was also just annoyed that I kept like going and coming back, going and coming back. Like it was just, she didn't feel like I decided I really needed to leave. And so anyways, I felt really screwed at that point. So I kind of appealed to Chris's girlfriend and was like, I'm really sorry to have to ask this of you, but can I like sleep on your floor, please? Excuse me. And like use your shower and such and exist here for a while I figure myself out. And explained my abuse and stuff, and she was just I feel like she, in any moral person, she was somewhat cornered. How do you say no to a person like that? At the same time, she could have said no, go to a shelter. And there's nothing wrong with saying that to someone if you're not financially or feeling comfortable, able to do that, right? But she said okay. And it's funny because she was actually a really emotionally mean person. Like, she was really hard on Chris. She was really, really cruel. And in one sense, I don't blame her, because she had a rough upbringing of parents that were really vicious to each other. And so that's hard to grow up around. At the same time, there's really no good excuse for being a mean person. You can reflect on your bad experiences and become a better person. So at the same time, she took me, she said I could stay with her, and like, I didn't want to impose on her too much, so I mostly only ate one meal a day for a while, and that was supper, and I'd always offer to make it. But yeah, she wasn't, she did a really good thing, and she was also kind of a cruel person, so it was interesting. But I stayed there for like 3 weeks or a month because the money didn't end up showing up when I expected it to, which really sucked. But I eventually finally did get it. Here it is. Yeah, I've gotten to this part now. The school started helping me at one point when they realized, oh, this was a little bit later though. They started giving me like lunch vouchers so I could have, a warm lunch from the CAF. But that was actually later on. So when my OSAP finally came in, I found a room, and then I got my first job at a call center. And it was another one of those jobs where they're like, anybody, we'll take anybody. If you can do it, then you can stay. um, and, well, I guess they didn't necessarily hire anybody because my friend went with me and she didn't get hired. But they kind of took, like, a lot of people were brought in, and they kept as many as they could because they were just looking for robots to do the job. But at this point, I was in touch with John, and he was like claiming to want to be supportive of me and understanding. And he was providing money to help, and he was actually like buying me groceries and such thing. And I talked to him again about wanting to just be father-daughter and stuff. And one of the things he did in us, like, I don't know, me trying to get closer with him again, is like he convinced me to quit that job because he said the ventilation in the place was very poor. So he didn't want me working it. And he did this at the same time upon also convincing me to move out of the room that I had gotten. I paid for 2 weeks. It's 2 weeks at a time that you pay for. But I only stayed for one. And he told me that like he'd sold the house and everything was all packed up and ready to go, but he was willing to try one more time to make it work and to try and figure out our family or whatever, if I was willing to give it one more shot. And I was like, well, all I want is father-daughter. Oh, that's interesting. This is where apparently I say it. And he was like, yes, yes, okay, yes. And then convinced me to leave, so I quit my job and I moved back. And then apparently, according to my testifying, and this was years ago, so it's probably more accurate, this is when he sat me down. And it does make sense, but I can't remember how he broke it to me before, where I kept saying, like, I just want father-daughter, and then I'd come back and he'd just be like, nope. But this time in particular is when he sat me down and was like, you're just pulling a Debbie and trying to make me support you while you sleep with other men. And that's just unreasonable. And come on now. So, yeah, went on, raped me again, and then kept me out of school for a while to like rest up or whatever. I don't know, I can't remember his excuse for it. But as soon as he put me back in school, I went to the secretary, and because I was kind of sort of close with her, and asked if I could speak with her. This, I guess, was February of 2011 at this point. She actually said she didn't have time to talk to me that day. So she said, can you come back the next day? So I did. And we like went to a private room in the council area, And I just kind of broke down right away and started talking to her about, like, my situation, that I needed help, and I was really hoping that, like, she would help me personally, because I was in this mindset where I didn't want to be involved with shelters, and I didn't want to be involved with excuse me. Sorry. Yeah. I didn't want to be involved with social services because he had me really convinced that having my name associated with all that stuff made me look bad, made me look like a gross person, a bad person, an unworthy person. All these preppy, unreasonable ideas about how I was a weaker, lesser person if I accessed things. So I didn't want to be associated with shelters and all that stuff. And so I was really trying to get people to help me without that. And she was just really afraid for herself, reasonably, and her job and her situation. So she's like, well, I'm going to go talk to the principal and see what I can do, what I'm able to do. So I went back to her at the end of the day, and she was like, I need to ask you to go home just one more time and then come back tomorrow. So I did. She's like, just say you have your period or something, which is funny because, like, that doesn't change anything. But so I did. I went home, and I don't think anything happened that night. And then came back the next day, and they just hid me in the office. But he could tell something was up. So it was interesting because he was actually pacing up and down the halls of the school, and like calling me incessantly and texting me and just being like, where are you? What's going on? Even though I should have been in class or whatever, but he was just like, he was clearly freaking out, and I was aware something was up, but they were just hiding me in the office, the back of the office. And when he finally left the school, they called a cab, and the secretary and myself went out into the cab together, and she went with me to the shelter and helped me register. And then I lived at the shelter for the next couple of months, month and a half, 2 months. That night, the police went with me to the house, and I had a key to the house that still functioned at the time, but he like put a butter knife jammed in the door, so even though I unlocked the door and it was unlocked, it wouldn't quite open. I had to like push it open. Just absurd. He claimed that was breaking and entering. It's just like, the key unlocked the door because I live here, my shit's here. Shut up. But anyways, that annoyed me. But I then spent like 15-20 minutes rushing around as much as I could, getting as much shit together as I could that I felt I needed and or wanted, because I didn't think I was ever going back to that house again at that point. And the police are like, you're only supposed to get like clothes and essentials. And I was like, I know, but I'm never coming back to this house again. And it's funny because I ended up like packing 2 cruisers with just shit stuff. Not like, it wasn't shit, it was genuine like stuff I needed, wanted, like, you know, I didn't need my guitar, but I really wanted it, kind of thing. And one box ended up not coming along. Like, it ended up, I don't know, getting lost and ending up in the lost and found, and I asked about it, and they didn't have anything to the description, and then apparently he went and ended up getting it. It had all kinds of my paperwork in it, which is really annoying that happened. But they, you know, with me and everything, they brought me back to the shelter, and I had all my stuff there, so like, or a lot of my stuff there, so that was kind of nice that I was able to do that. And he apparently, like, he claimed he deliberately stayed away from the house for that, because he obviously probably didn't want confrontation and such, and wasn't looking to make a fuss over what was already going down, I guess. And then, yeah, that's like, it's not the end of him being in my life, but that's the beginning of me starting to finally have my own life and my own space. I stayed in the shelter that was late February, and then I got my apartment in housing, which you get bumped into the emergency list, which is handy, at the beginning of April. So there's only a little over a month. It sucked, but as I mentioned, because the school was aware, they gave me hot lunches. all the time, and I was otherwise fed by the shelter. And there's also like a social assistance allowance you get at the shelter, and a lot of resources, actually. I would really advise, even if you actually have friends to stay with, I would advise going to a shelter if you can and trying to see what kind of resources that they have for you, because in my particular case, it was a abused woman shelter in particular, so that's why it was structured the way it was. But it was just one of the most helpful things they did for me was put me into London housing. So they put me into a situation where my rent was based off of my income, and I was like, my apartments were apparently worth like $500 to, you know, the average earning person, but to someone with an income like myself, I was paying $150. At one point, actually, this lady finagled my paperwork, and I ended up working it out so that it wasn't fraud, but she like frauded things and did it so that I wasn't working, and because the way she did it, I was only paying like $85, because that's if you have no job, that's your rent, is only $85. So if you're on assistance or whatever, that's stupid cheap. I mean, it was just a bachelor, but that's still stupid cheap. So, and that's how housing works no matter what the size of your unit is. So that was insanely helpful for first getting out. And that's why I would suggest anyone definitely go into a shelter situation. I know it sucks, especially because prostitutes tend to use them a lot, like kind of hotels, or so I've heard. In one sense, for the type of life they live, I don't blame them. And in another, it's like, that's where they have to have limits on how long you can stay and stuff like that. And that's not the funnest thing to be around. But if you're patient about your current experience and aware that, you know, you're not being abused, which is great, it's a good thing, you can get yourself your own little space that you can afford to live in, which is just really hard to find as a single person these days. So I guess I will continue on from there about how he didn't quite get out of my life right then and there, because he was still sort of being supportive of me, and I was trying to establish a father-daughter relationship, as I kept saying throughout these videos. Like, I was really pushing for that and insisting on that, and at this point I was now in the position where he wasn't going to hurt me. And believe it or not, I don't know why I did this, but I actually like slept over at the house a couple times while staying in the shelter, because he was claiming to be supportive of me, and he never hurt me. He never raped me again. He never hit me. I don't even think we fought. I mean, we might have tiffed a little, but during the shelter time, at least, like, he was okay. I don't know why I went back, because I could have got myself murdered right then and there, right? What's wrong with you, girl? But I did. And so from there, like, I was really trying to build some kind of father-daughter family relationship with him. And it was another 10 months or so before I finally got into therapy, and then another like year and a half or so before I finally reported him. So I guess that might be my final video, I'm not sure, but I will get into explaining that in the next video. Until then.